So here we're going to do the bullion stitch. And so I've already brought the thread up on the left hand side, and I'm going to put the needle back down on the right. It's about 1/4 inch apart. And then I'm going to bring the needle back up on the left hand side, but not pull the needle all the way through. And so with your right hand, if you're right-handed, you're going to wrap the thread around the needle in the counterclockwise, about 8 to 12 wraps. Now, if you use 8, you want to make sure that the wraps fill in the distance between the two places where you've, between point A and B of your stitch. If you use more than 8, that will help give the bullion a little bit of a curve to create some dimension. So you can experiment a bit with some of the wraps that you do. Now you want to hold on to the wraps as you pull the needle up through with the thread following. And you don't want any of those wraps to overlap each other, so you may have to do a little bit of tidying. That's what I'm doing here. And so I'm going to pull the thread a little bit more to tighten things up. And then I'm going to use my needle and I'm going to go back down on the right hand side with my needle to finish the stitch once I think it's looking pretty good. And then that is how you complete the bullion stitch. And then you can see that one's a little bit more curvier than the one on the left. Okay, so now we're going to do the feather stitch. And you can see I'm making a loop, going back down, and then coming up between that loop about 1/4 inch down and pulling slowly to create the first stitch. Your next stitch, you're going to go in and then down again between the loop and pull slowly to create a second stitch. So you just work back and forth, and each time you end your stitch, you go across from it, down, make your loop, and then come back up about 1/4 inch down. And then you just go back and forth. It's a very decorative stitch. I think it would make a great border. And then to finish, you just make a small stitch. You put your needle in below the last loop, and that will just tag it in place. Okay, so now we're going to show you the satin stitch. And you can see I've drawn a leaf on the right, and I've also drawn a vein right down the center of it. So this is a nice, easy leaf to do. So I'm going to make a stitch from the top down about 1/8 of an inch along the vein, so it's kind of a vertical stitch. And now I'm going to start doing the satin stitches. So I'm going to come back up at the tip of the leaf, and parallel with a little bit of an angle, I'm going to make a stitch that lies right next to the stitch I made. You don't want the threads to overlap, and you want to come up along your outside line each time, just to keep the edge of the leaf nice and smooth looking. So as you proceed with each stitch, you come up just next to the other length of thread, and then you go back down and you put your needle just below where your last stitch was made, and you just keep going slowly down, and you'll see my stitches are kind of angled down a little bit. You just take your time. If you overlap your stitches, it gets a little bulky, so you want to try to keep them just lying right next to each other. You don't want to see any gaps either, though. So in this particular video, I'm also using the spring hoop. This one's the 5-inch hoop, and I find it for myself a little easier to get my hands in closer to the elements that I'm working on. So if you're finding it hard holding on to like a larger frame, you could try one of these hoops. So by drawing the line down the center of the leaf, it just gives you a guide where to put your needle, and it also, when you finish the leaf, you have a nice definition there. It gives it some texture. And these would be really pretty if you used variegated colored thread. So I'm just getting close to the bottom, and the stitches are starting to get a little bit smaller, but you just finish by following the lines, and then when you get to the bottom, you'll put your last stitch in, your needle go into the tip at the bottom. And then you go back up to the top. Now this is a small leaf, so a little bit of travel like that isn't too bad, but you can always run your needle up underneath the stitches on the back to hide them or tuck them away as well. And so what you're going to do when you work the left-hand side of this leaf is just, you want your stitches to kind of mirror the stitches on the other side. So try your best to kind of match up how you did it on the other side. Same steps though, come up on the line of the leaf and then back down along that spine, the drawn line. And there's other ways to do a leaf. You don't have to draw a line down the center. And you can do different shapes as well. You can even do circles. If it's a smaller element, you might want to go back to 2 or 3 strands of thread if you want something more delicate looking. I'm using, in this example, 4 threads of floss. So you just keep repeating, and that's how you do the satin stitch. So there you just put in the last couple stitches, and then you can do the same, just go into the bottom point on the leaf, and then when it's done you just have to tie your knot off and it's complete.